Welcome to this new episode of the Smart and Sustainable City podcast. Today we talk with Andres Guevara, Vice President, City Integrated Solutions at BP.
We went through a massive reorganization in 2020 following the new purpose of the company, which is about becoming a net zero company by 2050 or sooner and helping the world get to net zero. 70% of the emissions from the world are coming from what we call cities. What is very interesting is that the cities can be much more in control of influencing the direction of those emissions. The cities have a number of levers that are quite important to drive change and drive decarbonization.
I must say that it is quite refreshing to hear a historical oil and gas company restructure itself and pivot to become an energy company that aims to help its customers, and cities in particular, become net zero by 2050 or sooner. Many companies are committing to green objectives these days, and everyone has to gain from such a transformation. The cities that will reduce their carbon footprint, the citizens that will enjoy cleaner air and better quality of life, and the company themselves as they develop a sustainable business future.
My name is Andres Guevara. I am originally from Venezuela. I'm also a Colombian citizen because my mother is Colombian. I'm an engineer by background. I studied engineering in Venezuela, started working straight out of university at Procter & Gamble for a little bit, then moved to McKinsey & Company, the consulting firm. And in 2003, I moved to Chicago to pursue my MBA at the University of Chicago. I wanted to get into the business world. And my way to stay connected to my home country was oil and gas. It's no secret that Venezuela is an oil country. BP was a company I admired. So I joined BP in Chicago in the year 2005. And I've been working in BP since then. It's been a tremendous ride in terms of variety of jobs and working all over the globe. I started working in the crude trading business, so trading crude oil from South America. I was based in Chicago. In 2019, got into the low carbon side of business development, getting into subjects like CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and subjects like blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen that you produce from decarbonizing natural gas. Last year, I was invited to join the team that was going to reorganize BP. We went through a massive reorganization in 2020 following the new purpose of the company, which is about becoming a net zero company by 2050 or sooner and helping the world get to net zero. And out of that reorganization, I am in a new role, which is a very exciting role and brand new, called VP, Vice President for City Integrated Solutions, which is a brand new area in BP, but it's very relevant for the new purpose of helping the world get to net zero. And we were going to get into that, but basically, as you know, cities are the source of more than 70% of emissions. So if we want to help the world get to net zero, we cannot ignore cities. So that's my story.
Impressive journey. Andres, I'm really interested to find out more about BP and your role as VP for City Integrated Solutions. But you said something that is really interesting just now about the new purpose of BP, reimagining energy and helping the world get to carbon net zero. That's not the image traditionally that people have of an oil and gas company. What's happening? What's going on?
We have a very proud and long history of more than 110 years. I think it's actually 112 years this year of having been an oil and gas company. I think our new CEO, Bernard Looney, saw very clearly the direction the world is taking, but also, most importantly, doing the right thing given the recognition of what climate change is doing. So that the path we've been on is not sustainable. And this is where the new purpose comes into play of, again, reimagining energy so we can become net zero and help the world get to net zero. And that triggered the biggest reorganization we have had in our corporate history It's literally touching every single aspect of our business, but it just shows the relevance of completely changing how we think about our business. And let me give you an example. In the classic oil and gas world, we have been most of the industry has been organized in upstream and downstream. So upstream is all the activity around exploration and production of hydrocarbons, and then downstream is the kind of commercialization and marketing of the refined products that we use in our cars and lubricants, etc. And it's been a very siloed organization. It has worked for the purpose of providing, light, heat, and mobility to the world. But in a world where we have to move to change from an international company, which is what we have been, into an integrated energy company. So the change is from oil to energy and from international to integrated. Uh, it's quite fundamental if you want to deliver your purpose. And let me give you an example. Right now, where you live, very likely you have a light bulb somewhere on top of you, and the electrons that are coming from those light bulbs are coming from some sort of fuel. The fuel that is in the tank of your car is also coming from very likely diesel or petrol or gasoline. And the heat in your kitchen and your home is coming from natural gas or something like that. So if you want to decarbonize your house, let's take your house as an example, or your life. If you want to become net zero, you need to find a solution that tackles the light, the petrol in your car, and the heat in your kitchen. And that means that if you want to help the world get to net zero and decarbonize, you need to think in an integrated fashion. You cannot solve the problem only by solving the lighting problem or the heating problem or the mobility problem. You need to think about this across all three, because otherwise you don't reach your objective. The second important thing is that the light bulb, the electrons going into the light bulb today, the fuel that is used for that very likely have nothing to do with the drop of petrol that is in your car. And that has been how it has worked up till now. But the world is changing. The energy systems are becoming much more integrated. And it's very likely that in the future, the same electron that provides light is the same electron that actually produces hydrogen that will fuel the bus that will take you to your office. And it's very likely that that same hydrogen or that same electron, not the same one, but from the same source, is the one that you're using to provide the heat at your house and your kitchen. So the systems are becoming much more integrated. And if you want to decarbonize, you need to think about in an integrated fashion as well. So that is one big change that BP is going through. There's a massive drive towards integration, and we have a new entity in BP called Region, Cities, and Solutions. That's the organization I belong to. So hopefully that provides a bit of perspective.
When we talk about cities, though, the same challenges that you expressed are true in cities, and cities need to reinvent the way they relate to energy.
Well, absolutely. And the thing is, in cities, you have this geographical space we call cities, where you have a political authority, uh, you have citizens like us, and you have corporations making decisions and doing business and doing activities. So it is not a surprise that is why, even though the only half of the population in the world is in cities today, that percentage is expected to grow over time. 70% of the emissions from the world are coming from what we call cities. Obviously, the city itself, as in the political authority, are not the source. It's our human activity in that city space. And I think what is very interesting is that the cities can be much more in control of influencing the direction of those emissions. So you obviously need policy at the national level, but the cities have a number of levers that are quite important to drive to drive change and drive decarbonization. The classic example is public transportation. I mean, pretty much any city in the world has some type of public transport system. And we know transport is one of the sources of emissions that we need to tackle. So the city has, either through policy or by simply owning the buses and the trams and the trains that in some occasions or in many occasions are owned by the public sector, they could actually drive decarbonization by saying, you know what, from now on, my buses are going to run on a zero carbon fuel. So this is not only about um, um, the individuals, not only about the companies and the corporations. This is also about the city, the political authority that in most places around the world is elected by the people, have the power to drive change, to drive decarbonization. And that is why I think cities are so relevant in this journey towards net zero, because they are in the front line. They have the power to instill change, to make change happen. And if the will of the people is to do that, uh, eventually that's going to drive decisions of governments at the local level that will need to deliver what people want. And decarbonization is one of those things that people are after, because there's a recognition that the world needs to change its course. We want to have a better quality of life, and decarbonization is not only about net zero, it's about quality of air, it's about noise, it's about bringing new industries and creating new jobs and investments. So it's a very broad agenda, and the city is at the center of it.
Andres, you recently wrote a op-ed on LinkedIn called Seven Emerging Learnings About Cities and the Energy Transition that highlights that the challenge is not just about decarbonization for cities. It's about quality of life. It's about creating jobs. It's about creating an approach that is also driven with or through partnerships.
Absolutely, and I think at the end of the day, you have cities that have all these interrelated pressures, right? Social, economic, environmental, and that's what city local governments are dealing with to try to bring solutions to those pressures. Part of the role a company like BP can play is that we can jointly with the city help find solutions that address some of these challenges. And the reason we can address them is because we can, just as we're reinventing our own company, we can also help reinvent the energy and mobility systems that cities have. And by working in tandem, public and private sector, you can actually catalyze that change. And you can, by doing that, create new jobs, which is what people want. You can attract new industries that don't exist today, green hydrogen, renewable sources of power, new means of transportation that are not on the roads today. In the process, address energy poverty, which is a problem even in developed countries, improve air quality, and in overall in that process, make sure that the energy transition occurs in a way that is just, that everyone is included and everyone has a fair shot as part of this transition. So I think working in partnership between the private sector and the public sector is going to be fundamental, because the problem we're trying to solve is extremely complex, but it is solvable. I think what the point to stress here is it takes collaboration, and it will, by working together, we can address many of the issues that cities are facing.
Now, every city is fundamentally different, a different geographical landscape, different political systems, different development that has conducted cities to be where they are today. Do you have some examples of cities that are embarking on this transformation and maybe together with BP?
Yeah, let me give you two examples. We have announced already two that are public: the city of Aberdeen and the city of Houston. Obviously, we know them very well. They are cities that, Houston is considered the energy capital of the world by some. Aberdeen, on the other hand, has been considered the oil and gas capital of Europe and is positioning to become the hydrogen capital of Europe. We have been operating in both for many years. So we kind of know each other very well. Both cities also realize that we need to change. We need to change not only because it's the right thing for the planet, we need to change because they need to reinvent themselves if they want to remain relevant in a world that is decarbonized. They need to find different sources of business activity, underlying business activity. And what that does is you have a deep relationship and a very strong alignment in terms of sustainability and ambition to decarbonize. That is a very powerful mix to actually work together. Now, both cities are very different. In both cases, they have very clear plans to get to net zero. For example, Aberdeen by 2045 and Houston by 2050. But what we have found is that, again, no one can do this alone by itself. We need to work together. So what we have done is join with both Houston and Aberdeen as partners to help them get to the end game of the energy transition, that ambition that they have set for themselves. Houston, for example, is fascinating. It's a city that has a very important mobility component. I mean, anyone who has been in Houston knows that they have these huge highways, lots of cars everywhere. Pretty much everyone drives. So mobility is one of the things we need to tackle. One of the things we have announced is a partnership between BP and Uber that started in London last year, and we took it with Uber across the Atlantic to Houston. And the logic here was the following. Well, why don't we start? One of the key points of the energy transition is we need to find anchor demand. Where is the anchor demand that is going to help us start the transition towards the new energies, towards the low carbon energies? And Uber is that potential source of demand. So they said, well, we have a fleet of vehicles. We want to decarbonize them by turning them into electric vehicles. But Uber doesn't want to make the investment of changing their vehicles to EVs unless they have certainty that they will have charging infrastructure in place. Equally, we don't want to deploy charging infrastructure if we don't have certainty that there will be demand. So why don't we join forces? I will provide certainty that EV charging will be available to you, Uber. And Uber, you will provide certainty to us that there will be enough demand to justify the investment in EV charging. But that's not enough. You need land. And land is one of the biggest bottlenecks to find in a city. I mean, anyone in any city knows that land is a very scarce resource. But that's where the city plays a role. So the city can help us identify which land can be made available to deploy EV charging hubs that initially will be used by Uber. But by deploying them, then you start opening the option for private citizens, the city fleet, to start converting as well, because they hadn't made that decision because there was no source of supply of EV charging hubs around the city.
Houston is definitely an innovation hub. So is Aberdeen, which is the third largest city in Scotland with almost 200,000 inhabitants. And they've taken a direction to develop hydrogen hotspots for
Exactly.
their fleet of bus vehicles. And is that done in collaboration with BP?
Aberdeen started this, I think, in 2015. Aberdeen, in this sense, has been an absolute pioneer in the space of hydrogen mobility. Now, they've started, and we have joined them last year in this partnership we have created to help them get to net zero by 2045. But I have to say, Aberdeen deserves a lot of credit for, again, that leadership they have taken since 2015 in this space. Now, there are other interesting facts about Aberdeen. Aberdeen has the largest district heating system in the UK. It's operated and owned by Aberdeen City Council. It's called Aberdeen Heat and Power, and that district heating system burns natural gas and warms up water, and that water then heats a number of council homes and municipal buildings and so on. They also have a fleet of around 140 municipal buses. And they have said, you know what, we're going to start by decarbonizing. And they started with a pilot for hydrogen buses, but now they've taken the next step. So one of the interesting things of our partnership is we've been working together on developing a vision of what an integrated energy system could look like to decarbonize the city of Aberdeen. And based on that work, they have gone through a public procurement process earlier in the year. There has been very positive market interest, and they're going to move forward with a competitive process. But the fascinating thing about this vision is that you can imagine a world where Aberdeen City Council actively plays a role by being not only the customer of this energy system that will procure hydrogen for buses and district heating one day, but it could expand to become a source of income for the city because it could start selling hydrogen to private sector players and even export. The fascinating thing is that we call it an integrated energy system because it goes from all the way from renewable power to hydrogen production, to hydrogen refueling, and some of that power can also go into EV charging hubs. So it's an integrated energy system that can help decarbonize mobility and heating in a city like Aberdeen, where Aberdeen is a customer and also a partner. So in that case, the private sector would be working with the city directly, contracting with the city as an anchor customer, and then grow from there to decarbonize other sectors of the economy and society.
That's super interesting. As you are transforming yourselves from an oil to an energy company, you're also enabling cities to transform themselves into becoming a better place to live, decarbonizing the city, but also helping them reinvent maybe also their business relations with their citizens and the companies that come and innovate and grow in the landscape of the city, such as in Aberdeen, where there are many startups and many innovative companies establishing themselves in Aberdeen. But tell me, Andres, you mentioned that your target is to have 10 to 15 cities by, you said, the end of the decade. If a city is now already in that decarbonization and that transformation process, or is thinking about embarking and accelerating on this path, what's the good starting point? What would be your advice to for a city to get started?
There are organizations out there that have done a terrific job of trying to drive cities towards playing a much more important role. Let me give you an example. C40 is one of those organizations. It's an organization that um, gathers, I think it's close to 100 cities now around the globe. And one of the key pieces of advice from C40 is that a city obviously first needs to want to decarbonize. So the ambition needs to exist. And then it's really important to develop a climate action plan. Each city is very unique. Each city is unique in terms of the resources they have, the industries they have, their geography, their location, their weather. So each city will need to figure out what is the best way to get to net zero. And in that process, deliver all the benefits we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. But developing a climate action plan is quite a fundamental first step. So I would say that cities can reach out to consulting firms, to C40, to companies like BP that are committed to this space to get help. Because I think I go back to the point, we need to collaborate here. This problem is tremendously complex. So you first need to have a plan. The next step is some cities already have plans, some don't have plans, so they need to develop them. Those who have plans sometimes have the plan, but don't have the way or the knowledge to execute those plans. And I don't blame them because they are cities. They don't know how to run an energy system or develop a new energy system. So that's where you need the help. And that's where companies like BP can come and play a role. I think the example of hopefully of Houston and Aberdeen give a bit of an illustration of what that art of the possible is of working between BP and a city. And I think that is what would be my recommendation. The other important thing I would mention is obviously the world, we have developing economies, developed economies, and so on and so forth. Not everyone can immediately afford net zero, but I think you don't need to necessarily move straight to net zero. You can move into lowering your carbon footprint. So I just want to stress that because, for example, every time we change or substitute the fuel from diesel to natural gas for power generation, we're benefiting the world. We're lowering the carbon footprint. So this doesn't need to be net zero or nothing. We can also start in other parts of the world by lowering the carbon footprint. And literally this week we announced an agreement with Infosys, the technology company in India, to start decarbonizing their campuses. So Infosys has 9 campuses around India. These are like small towns. The Indian power grid is 70% coal-fired power generation. 70%. So if you can decarbonize these campuses by using a combination of natural gas with renewable power, and your footprint is going to be for sure much lower, than 70% of the footprint of coal-fired power generation if they connect to the grid. So not everything is net zero. Let's keep low carbon in mind as well.
Andres, BP has a program called Launchpads, which helps companies, startups embark on that energy transformation. Can you tell us a little more about this program? And I'm particularly interested in your engagement with a company called Photech that was recently acquired by BP as part of that program, and for which we had the CEO of Chris Shannon of Photech join us in a previous episode.
Launchpad is kind of the platform we use to incubate and grow new ventures. We have a long history in the whole venturing space and incubation space. And Photech is one of those great examples. It's a fascinating case of technologies that have been used for our traditional or legacy businesses that now could be used for other things. So Photech is using fiber optics to basically read what happens above ground. So you have fiber optics running pretty much around any major road around the globe today, and those fiber optics can pick signals that then can be turned into information. So imagine traffic management, imagine security management of perimeters. You can know if a road is kind of being transited a lot or not, and depending on that, divert traffic around, and that obviously improves noise and air quality levels and so on and so forth. So the possibilities are huge, but that's just one example of many, Pierre.
Fantastic. So a transformation is underway in BP, taking the company from oil to energy. And this translates into everything BP does day in, day out. And it affects the way you engage with cities and with partners, which are essential for that transformation.
Absolutely. Many times we don't have all the answers or we don't have all the capabilities. We need to join forces with others to complement each other to deliver on that. Let me give you an example that we talked about, we announced last year. We announced a partnership with Microsoft that is not gonna, we're gonna help them, or we're helping them decarbonize their data centers by supplying green power to their data centers, which are big users of energy and increasing. They are helping us with their technology to make our operations more efficient, safer, and efficient also from a carbon footprint perspective. But we're also exploring what we can do together, particularly in the city space, to deploy solutions in the technology space to help cities decarbonize. So a funny coincidence is that Microsoft is a technology partner of Aberdeen, just like we are the energy transition partner of Aberdeen. So you can imagine already that energy system I described before could be running on a Microsoft platform. And that's how three parties collaborate to achieve a common goal.
Fascinating conversation. Andres Guevara, Vice President, City Integrated Solutions at BP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre.
Don't forget to subscribe to our Instagram and Facebook page. If you want us to cover your Smart City initiative, do reach out. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on our next episode.